Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Megan.
Hi.
Megan, I know it's early for you since you're in New Zealand and there happens to be a 17-hour time difference, which makes me wonder why, if we made up time, how come we haven't been able to just work off the same one? Like, who was the guy that was like, well, there's all these different time zones. And then when daylight savings happens, guess what? Some people switch to it and some people are like, I don't know. I'm good. I think I'm going to let that slide.
Honestly, it's so confusing. Like New Zealand, we're quite lucky. We're only on one time zone, but Australia, different states have different time zones, but they'll be on the same coast. So New South Wales and Queensland, one of them observes daylight savings and the other one doesn't. So imagine if you live on the border, you have to constantly be working within two time zones because if you had to go to work in New South Wales,
Oh
I
my
get
God.
this wrong all the time. And then the other one doesn't, you'd have to be going, okay, I have to wake up an hour earlier than I do where I'm living to go to somewhere to start at their time. So yeah, we're lucky where we are, but we are one of the first nations in the world to see the sunrise. So when the new year happens, like yay, it's Happy New Year's, and then everyone else kind of comes along a few hours later. So
I'm usually complaining that it's the New Year's because my birthday is New Year's Eve. So it's like everyone's like, well, your birthday is the biggest party day of the year. I'm like, everybody's partying for it to end. Like, nobody wants that day. It's all about partying that night and then waiting till the next day. That's all they're celebrating for.
oh,
Yeah, definitely depressed myself a lot as a kid thinking that way.
you just have to be like, okay, everybody in the world is partying right now because it's my birthday.
Well, Megan, I have to ask you this major question, which is the big one. Are you ready for how deep it is this early in the morning?
Sure, let's get into it.
What would you say defines you?
What defines me is I think it took me a long time to kind of realize like who I was as a person because I was always trying so hard to fit into different molds. But honestly, the thing that really defines me is my obsession with nature. So I lived in the UK for the last 2 years and I was living in London at super metropolitan and I could not stand not seeing the sunset. It really messed with me. And in New Zealand, not currently where I live, but where I used to live, I was always 10 minutes away from the beach. So for me, it's like having that kind of sense of like natural surroundings. And I'm also very naturally inquisitive. So I always want to know everything about everyone, about every single part of history. And my friends always kind of joke that I'm like a walking fun fact. So like, oh, I know a fun fact about that. They're like, of course you do. Like, so
What's your
yeah.
obsession with is it just sunsets or you like sunrises as well?
I find, yeah, or both, but found that not being able to see the sun like set and rise really put me out of whack because here, well, currently where I live, so I've just moved. So I used to live in Auckland, which was, in the grand scheme of things, it's quite small, but it was a population of about 2 million. So half of New Zealand's population lives in Auckland. So I've now moved and live a little bit more semi-rurally, but so more on the countryside. But everywhere I go, I always see the sunrise and the sunset, and you just get so used to it. And that's just part of your daily commute, that's part of your daily life. And then when I moved to London, I was like, I couldn't even tell what time of day it was because I feel like everything that I was always, but I didn't realize this for a long time.
That's because the weather,
That's
right? That it's like so kind of like I guess foggy or dreary that it like you don't really get to see the sun. Imagine being in a place where you can't see the sun.
Yeah, I know I couldn't do it. And they're like, is it like quite northern? Is it like Iceland and Norway and they get winter and they see the sun for like 2 hours a day? Like I could not do that. I'm obsessed with the sun. Like I'm a sun baby. As soon as it's hot outside, I'm like out there. And it's like as soon as it's warm, I'm like I'm out. I'm always outside. I'm always at the beach. Um, yeah, so whenever the temperature gets a bit warmer, like it's a beautiful spring day today in New Zealand, which is also weird because, so first of all, I'm like quite far ahead of you as in time wise, but also I've got opposite seasons.
That makes sense.
So
So your winter is our
yeah,
summer, and then
yeah,
our summer is your winter.
yeah. So our summer is over Christmas and New Year's. So we all go away for the summer and like have really big road trips and go and enjoy the beaches.
I would
Yeah,
hate
so
to be an old person that's lived like 60 years in the United States, then move to New Zealand where you're like too stubborn to change your ways. And you're like, no, this is Christmas time. I'm putting on my giant puffy jacket. And they're like, hold on, it's 120 degrees outside. You're going to die of heat exhaustion.
yeah, and they're like, no. So it's also the weird thing too. Like, this is so unrelated to what we should be talking about. But anyways, our Christmas decorations are frosty. So we have a Christmas tree, and then all of our decorations will be like snowflakes and snowmen and like Santa, and everybody's in their big puffy gear. And I never thought it was weird until I lived in the UK, and they were like, well, you have Christmas in summer, so why do all your decorations dressed up as if they're in winter? And I'm
Because
like,
that's the
I'd
season
never
that,
thought about that
well,
most people observe.
well, it's funny because I guess that happens to do with media because the fact of all media when it comes to Christmas movies all display it as that one season, but most of the time it takes place in like the United States when it comes to like a major Christmas film. So it's like you're following off the United States way.
Yeah,
So you think they would adjust to that, like instead of having
yeah,
snowflakes, have like sunshine or something.
exactly. So why don't they just do a Christmas film in New Zealand or Australia? Like, I'm just pitching it out there.
It's
Someone
too
pick
too
that up.
far, too far away.
Too far. No one wants to go.
I don't feel like time traveling 17 hours.
They're like, no. Well, the funny thing is, oh, so this is another tangent, is that like you're in America, which I feel like should be closer to us, but you're 17 hours behind us. And it takes 12 hours for us to fly to LA.
I
And
don't
I'm like, how does this work?
the time conversion thing kills me because I'm like, there's a couple like maybe like not even what 5-6 hours away. There's a whole nother state that's an hour behind us. And I'm like, how does it function that much? It doesn't make any sense possible. But like, I want to go back to this. I said, what's your favorite, a sunrise or a sunset?
Yeah,
There's a distinct difference between the two, and I don't think a lot of people understand that because I used to do jet skis. So I live in a beach
yeah,
town. So I get to
yeah,
see every single day the sunrise and the sunset. I'm so used to it. But
yeah,
when it was a morning ride going out at like 6 a.m., you get the nice smell of like the nice morning, get the nice bay water, you get to smell the salt. You would see the blues and these
yeah,
cool, very, very cool colors when you go out on the first ride.
yeah,
But then in the afternoon, it's a different experience. It's the same sun, it's just different experience. It was a
yeah,
red and orange, and it was like this warmth feeling. Like you could feel it slowly starting to get back to that cool level. It's kind of cooling down. But I
yeah,
remember just like when a jet ski drives, so the water shoots off to the side as the jet ski's going forward. And I would
yeah,
stick my hand out, like lean down, stick my hand out, and just feel the water hit my hands while this red orange glow was just sitting on top of the water. And it's flat as glass. Some of my best freaking memories are just watching the ponies on the beach while I'm driving my jet ski, bringing this crew of people back and just seeing that. I'm like, that's when you really want to sit and enjoy something. And what sucks is
yeah,
in your everyday life, people miss that
yeah.
opportunity to really take it in.
Well, that sounds really magical, and I feel like I was just completely there, like riding into the sun with like the orange, beautiful golden hour going on.
And like you're not allowed to do jet skis at night. Like you're not allowed to, that's illegal. So like I would
Hmm.
I would count it to the last minute of me just like I'm gonna slow cruise this thing. Like Rob, you need to be back. The sun's going down. I'm like, it's not down yet. It's not down yet.
Yeah, like
It's
yeah,
hitting
like
that
I've
mark.
still got a minute, guys. Just
Yeah.
give it me this moment.
Let me cry in peace.
So, yeah, cool. So that's like that's kind of New Zealand. That's me. So, I don't know what you wanted to talk about, but I'm
Well,
really excited to be here.
well, I'm happy to have you on here. But like I said, it's just conversation. Don't feel like you're scripted or anything. It's just like we're just gonna talk. But sunrise or sunset, which one do you choose? Can't choose them both.
Yeah, well, I probably got the sunset to be fair, purely because I love those like beautiful like pinks and oranges and reds that come out in a good sunset. And then people are always like, I always notice this because people go up and they photograph the sunset and they're like, yep, cool, we've got it, and they walk away. And I'm like, you got to wait. There's a few more minutes, and then you get the good sun, like the good sunset, you know?
I used to get so much crap on my personal Instagram because I would post nothing but sunrise or sunset pictures. Like I did this thing called Rock Stack Sunday, which I would take all these, and these rocks are still in my car. I have not done this in like 2 years, but they're just sitting in my backseat rolling around whenever I hit a sharp turn. Someone's like, "What the hell was that?" I was like, "Oh, and they're just rocks in my backseat." But I would stack these rocks up, and then as the sun or sunrise, sunset, whatever you want to say, was coming and would hit just above those rocks, I would take a picture. And people are like, why do you always post pictures of the sun? I'm like, because none of them Not each one is unique. None of
Yeah.
them are exactly the same. And
Oh
this
no,
is
never.
something everybody can experience. How many times do you go on social media and somebody posting up, just got a new Lexus? It's like, okay, well, that's good for you, but what about everyone else? The sun is something we all can experience.
I love that. And I also think as well, like if you ever drive and you would like, I'm going to paint that sky, no one would believe you that the sky would look like that. I always think about that.
Well, considering Bob Ross, all he painted was trees.
Yeah. But even believes his trees.
Oh my God, you're right. I didn't even
Yeah.
think about that.
So I'm actually working from home today by choice. So New Zealand is not in lockdown. We are at COVID alert level 1, so it means that everything is pretty much back to normal. But we are allowed only just now to travel to Australia. But if we come back, we have to quarantine, like hotel quarantine. But still, no one's allowed to come to New Zealand. Like, oh, the only time the border's been open is for people returning, like returning residents and citizens. So we've had no tourists for so long that everything is really quiet. But it's also really weird because we're so far in the ocean. I feel like we're kind of floating in the middle of the ocean in like this little New Zealand, like only bubble.
You're cut off like in like a dome in the Simpsons movie.
I feel like that's us.
Well,
Like,
how difficult is it for you to do your job from home? Has it been like a major shift?
so I actually lost my job
What?
because of COVID. So we had our first lockdown was in March. So I was very lucky. So as I said, I was living in the UK. So I moved back home to mum and dad's. And so I was living with my parents and I was doing some contracting work. So I work in museums. So I was doing some contracting work with the New Zealand Maritime Museum. I was helping them research and write a book. And then COVID happened and they kind of said, oh, everything just, nope, sorry, we can't have you back in. So I wasn't full-time employed, but I was on contract. So that was really hard. So then because we were at home, our lockdown level 4 was so strict that we could only go to the supermarket. One person could go from your whole house to the supermarket, and you could only go to the pharmacies, and you could only walk and do exercise within your radius of where you lived. So you weren't allowed to drive anywhere unnecessarily. So everybody just stayed at home. But actually the best part is it was actually such nice weather during lockdown. So people like we did so much gardening at home. So I did a lot of gardening with my parents. We just spent a lot of quality time together. It was quite weird because my brother lives down the road and we weren't allowed to see them, but I could see them over the fence. And basically, I just did a lot of research and writing. So I also do my Museums with Meg Instagram. So I really kind of pumped through that. That was me trying to get back into the swing of doing museum work through lockdown. So
Where did the passion for museums start, and what exactly are you focused on? Because I mean, you could talk about we have an air space museum down here, we have a fish museum down here, we have all these different types of museums that focus on different categories. What's your typical interest?
you guys have so many museums.
And nobody
So
ever goes to them, which is the crappy part.
oh no, so I've been working in museums for about 7 years. So I originally went traveling when I was about 21, came back and I was like, I've got my career, guys. I'm going to be a tour guide. I like talking, I like information, and I like sharing knowledge. And I went to Auckland Museum and I said, yeah, I'm going to be a tour guide. Take me on. And they said, you're too young. They're like, you're too young. People, if we do all this training with you, you're just going to leave. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, like I was actually really interested in doing it. So she said instead, she was like, do you have a fear of heights? And I was like, oh, not that I know of. So my first ever job, so this is
You're gonna
well,
find out.
I was like, yeah, sure. So my first job was so in the Pacific, they there's these trees called paper mulberry, and they're stripped, and they do it in Hawaii actually as well. So they strip these trees and they kind of wet them and then they blend them. Blend is a terrible word. Kind of meld them together and they make these giant things called tapa. In Hawaii, it's called kapa. So it's just a way that these sorts of mats are made and then they're decorated and they're used as like house hangings or for flooring. Sometimes they're used for funerals. So your like the casket will be covered in a tapa and then I think I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm not going to say which culture it is because I'm going to get it wrong, but there's a Pacific culture that the more revered you are, the more tapa is put over your casket when you die. So they take forever to make, and it's a labor of love. And so my first ever job, sorry, this is back to my first ever job in the fear of heights, was that I had to go up on a cherry picker about 5 meters in the air and then photograph these tapa like kind of suspended over them, because they're so massive that there was no way to photograph them for the collection. And the lady that I was working under had a fear of heights. So I kind of got in that way, and I finished 6 months with her. And I was like, this is the coolest job ever. Like, how do I get to do this full time? So I finished university, and then they were like, okay, you need to do postgrad now. So then I did a postgrad in museum and heritage. And then again, every day I was at the museum going, how do I get in? Like, I want to keep working as a collection manager. So I started off doing more like conservation care. And then I moved and I was Pacific collection manager. So I worked more like ethnography collections. I can never say that properly. Ethnography collections.
I can't even spell that. If you ask me to.
Ethnography collections. Yeah, ethnographic collections. There we go. So I worked with ethnographic collections, and then for a long time, and then I've done a little bit of curation, and then I moved to the UK, and I was working at the Imperial War Museum, and I was a registrar, and then I was working in Cambridge in the UK as kind of like an outreach kind of teacher. I don't know, you guess what you would say. So I was kind of doing like tour guiding and teaching, and then came back to New Zealand. And then now I work in a really tiny museum in the countryside, and there's about 6 people that work there, and I'm the only person that does collections. So that's kind of the roundabout way of how I've got into collections. So the fascination with museums with me is that every single day is completely different. Every day, like, you get such cool work stories. Like, I tell people about what I've been doing, and they're like, are you sure that's a real thing? I'm like, yeah, my job's really cool.
Oh, well, hold on. So, shoot me one of these work stories. What are you talking about?
So one of my first days, so when I was talking about when I was like volunteering at university, I came to work and I was like, cool, I'm gonna have a really good first day. The lady I was working with was like, hey, how are you with like sea animals? And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm kind of just like quite adaptable. I'm like, yeah, that should be fine, we'll sort it out. She goes, so part of an acquisition that they got at the museum was this giant squid. And she was like, it's in this tub. And she goes, because it's still covered in salt water, you need to kind of suit up, and I need you to wash the squid. And I was like, this is my first day on the job.
Second. You got to wash a squid.
Yeah, but like a giant squid. So it's like over 2 meters long. And it's like its tentacles, like, because I had to pick up and like thoroughly wash it and like pick up its tentacles and like wash underneath it. And I just was curious and was like, I'm just going to touch it. And they still had suction, like.
There's a person out there that's like, you ever see dog washers? There's a person out there that washes people's octopuses. I don't know how niche of an audience that is, but there's a guy out there with a fan that's doing it.
Yeah, they just like, this is a cool thing. So, and that's what I mean, like in museums, everything's quite different. And then sometimes it's quite legal as well. So at the moment, I'm doing a little bit of work with like the repatriation of like human remains. And so people just don't expect that that's kind of part of my daily work life, having these kind of really tough and awkward conversations about how we reunite people with their ancestral remains, and they could be like 4 to 5 generations on and have no knowledge of that person. So yeah, so that's like, for me, museums is just, working in museums is so interesting. It's a lot of work, like it's really hard some days and it's quite stressful, but it's also creative as well. And that's kind of why I really enjoy it. And also I'm a massive nerd, so I get paid to actually geek out and do research. So, you know, I'm never going to complain about that.
What's your favorite thing you've learned or done research about? Like, what's one topic that you find pulls you the most into a direction?
I think with me, like, I kind of get on a tangent about something, and then that is all I will study and all I will research for a while. So I did a bit of research while I was working in Cambridge in the UK about Kiribati. So that's an island nation in the top part of the Pacific, and it actually spans the north, south, east, and west latitude, longitude. The way that it sits, is the only island nation in the world that it actually sits in all 4 hemispheres. So they created an armor out of not octopus. Why have I got octopuses on my brain? Coconut fiber. So it's woven coconut fiber to make this armor, and then they would get these hunt for pufferfish. I actually did put this on my Instagram if anyone actually wants to read it, because it sounds more technical on there than I'm explaining it. So they would hunt for pufferfish. So someone would go and hunt a pufferfish, bury it under the sand, and then hunting for the pufferfish blows up. They then spear it, and then they bury it under the sand, and then the sand would actually somehow do something and dry out the fish scales. They would remove the fish scales. They'd made a woven hat, and then they would put the fish, like the puffer fish, over the top to make a helmet. So it's really, really stiff. The rest of the armor is made out of, as I said, coconut fiber, and it's woven. And it's super thick and super stiff.
Yeah.
Then they would make a sword. So the Kiribati warrior. So then I'd make a sword, and it had shark teeth all around it. So then you're thinking, oh, cool. So they're going to war, but they're not going to war. So
what? This is like a freaking movie right now. Like with the way you're explaining it, that holy crap. So they used shark teeth on a sword. Then they made their armor out of coconut fiber. And for people listening, you're thinking coconut doesn't seem like that tough of a fruit. It actually really is.
It really is. Yeah, it's so thick.
There's a very famous story of a guy that shot himself while trying to open up a coconut. He was stranded on an island. He takes the butt of his gun and starts beating it, and a bullet fires off into his stomach, and he dies that way. So I'm like,
I'm not even surprised.
That's insane, man. Holy crap. Oh my, what was the name of that tribe?
So it's in Kiribati. So it's spelled Kiribati, but it's pronounced the T-I is pronounced as an S. So the interesting thing about Kiribati is that all of this armor was made for ritual, and it wasn't actually made to impale anybody. So if your tribe had done something wrong to my tribe, we would have kind of a scuffle to do, what would you say, to kind of get comeuppance for what you did, how you wronged me.
Yeah.
So they would have this kind of ritual fight. So there'd be two warriors going one-on-one, and then there'd be other people around them, but they would have smaller kind of shark tooth swords and like less armor, but they were kind of there as like the backup, you know what I mean?
So basically the scene from Ace Ventura where he gets double arrows in his knees, but he's fighting the tribe warriors.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite interesting. And then say, for example, these two warriors are going at it, and you accidentally kill one of them. That is so bad that your tribe has to give the other tribe all your land.
Oh my God, the way our societies have evolved in different cultures and heritages are so crazy. I mean, even the fact that like not even too long ago, if you were a thief or something, they would chop your hands off as payment, and like it was just this whole mindset thinking. Like even with Genghis Khan and all that, like around that time when there were great warriors like that, the biggest thing was that if you were a man, they would take your nether regions, the nuts part.
Yeah.
And just so you wouldn't breed, so they wouldn't have any more enemies to breed. I'm like, it makes sense, but it is so barbaric to see how we've transferred now to where we have Instagram, Twitter, and all these things. It is freaking insane.
And what are people going to do? Just disable my Instagram? I'm still going to exist. Like,
well, technically, you'd probably be emotionally broken up. I feel like with a lot of people, we've attached to that.
Honestly, like if someone took away my Instagram, I would not be okay.
It's a weird thing. I think it's because we're all kind of like, there's I bring it back to heritage. Okay, so you're going to have to bear with me on this long haul for a very short drink of water.
Go for it.
Basically, like back in the day, it was all about tribes. It was like there was always a fight to be the tribe leader. Whoever wanted to be alpha, there was always the people that, would try and test the alpha. I think it's the same thing with Instagram and with followers. The followers show a representation of a following of people that believe in you, but it's not like how it was back in the day. It's not like these people would kill for you. None of our Instagram followers, I don't think, unless they're psychopaths, would actually hurt anybody for us. It's this weird thing. I feel like it goes back to the survival mentality. I'm like, if you really want followers that would literally bleed for you, homeless people, feed them.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
so the easiest route to get anybody to follow you to the end of the earth. If you get a homeless person a place to live and a sandwich, it's like doing them a godsend favor. But it does, I feel like, stem back from like the old heritage type thing where we are trying to be a leader. Everyone wants to be a leader. Everybody wants people to look up to them in admiration. But I'm like,
Yeah.
social media makes it so weird because half like now they do a thing now where you don't have to, even if you're following the person, you don't have to even view their stuff. You can mute their story and mute their news feed. So then it's like, this person hasn't liked my photo in like 10 days. Do they still care about me? Well, they're still following me. I'm like, yeah, but it's this weird mind
Exactly.
game.
It's so weird. And to be honest, like I never thought that I would be so into Instagram. I just always was like, oh, there's all these like influencers and models and gym buffs and I don't know, all these sorts of other outlets. And then I started mine about 2.5 years ago, just as like a visual diary for myself. And then I realized that there was all these other people out there doing what I was doing, but they've kind of got different ways of doing it. So mine is very focused on museums and kind of what I'm doing and things behind the scenes. And then there's all these other people like all over the world doing similar sort of like history blogging. And I'm like, wow, there's actually this like really cool geeky community out there and I'm part of it. So
I mean, you could definitely use it in a positive way if you create like good connections and groups with people. But the weirdest thing is I guess the most that are on there that you kind of come across are like people that want to lead and want their voice to be super heard, like feeling like
yeah,
they have all the insight into life that you've never even thought about. And it's like, hang on a second. That's George Washington thinking. You know what I mean? Like that's like I'm gonna be the leader and the president the very first.
sorry, I've just got a little pug who was having a bark.
I thought he was sneezing.
No, that sorry, just Bella. I do agree with you that people just want to be super heard and want to be, you know,
Well, it's not
kind of.
it's never a bad thing. I think
No, it's not.
the weird thing is it's just been an unrealistic expectation upon people to accomplish something, and especially in today's day and time, it was a lot easier to be told in a history book back in the day. Mostly because nothing was really discovered. Everything was being, just being found out. Like, oh my God, there's this. Everything, nowadays it seems like everything's discovered, but it's obviously not true because we're still coming up with new stuff. But I think it's the amount of creativity. It seems like we want to be just like somebody. We always want to structure ourselves off somebody else, either a celebrity or somebody famous. And it's like, hang
Yeah.
on a second, we got to find ourselves, which is really interesting because when I came across your page and saw the museum talk stuff, I'm like, this is something a lot of people don't even realize is that there is this thing. It's not Wikipedia. It's going to give you the right information. It's going to, you're going to be able to see it for yourself too. So it's like, it's a whole experience going to one of those things and really taking it all in because you get to see how as a society we've progressed, how everything has evolved. People talk about, like I've even mentioned, people always stand up for the Native Americans. They were bad too, but not really. Nobody was really super, super evil in the whole grand scheme of things. We think that they're evil now because of how our minds have evolved. But if you look into the Mayans used to eat each other and do weird games where they would carve open or chop off people's heads and eat the inside of their heads, like the brain and stuff, thinking that feasting upon a
Yeah.
warrior, you would gain their essence and their soul. And it's like, they're not evil in today's standards. They look hella evil. But back in the
Yeah.
day, that was the thinking. I'm like,
That was the norm.
yeah,
Like,
we've progressed so freaking far as a society. It's like, what are we doing now that in 10 years from now is not going to be okay?
yeah, no, I completely agree. And what I would say again is like, with doing the sort of like museum Instagram that I don't even know really how to describe it, but it's like a museum Instagram is that I was finding is that all this information that I wanted and I wanted to kind of engage with social media with, different museums and find out all these things behind the scenes is that everything was so constructed. And I don't want to say it, but it's quite stuffy. And people like do see museums as really old and stuffy and like, what are you guys doing and how are we going to keep learning? Like all you do is worry about history. And so I just was really using it as a way. It's like, well, I'm learning all these different things and I'm learning the history to make things relevant. And, I just want to make it a bit more fresh. And I think this kind of outreach, like digital outreach, is so much bigger than people realize. And I'm working in such a small museum now that I'm kind of saying, like, I want to do this for social media. At the moment, I'm actually editing a little walkthrough that I've just done of my latest exhibition. And they're like, why would we do that? They're like, what's the point? I'm like, because people want to see and get explanations beyond the walls. And I think, you know, again, that's like this natural progression, is that people are just so hungry for information, and the way that we kind of take on information has completely changed. Like, for example, you're doing a podcast. So, you know, people want that information in different ways. It's not just us picking up a textbook. People want to learn through conversation, and people want to learn by engagement, and people want to learn through digital avenues. So as long as you make things interesting and relevant, you can actually get more outreach than you thought you would. And you're not just getting it from who's visiting. Like for us, we're not just getting it through who's visiting the museum. Like, I have people who follow me who like live in England who are like, wow, you're doing such a good job, send me what you're doing. And so I've like now created all these friendships and kind of networking that, you know, I know that if I was to go back to England in a post-COVID world, I've kind of got all these other connections. And the weird thing is too, is I've actually got 2 job offers through Instagram, which I don't think I would have ever had the opportunity to get.
Were any of
with
them like being a brand ambassador for like a vegan keto company? Because I got about 12 of those in a row.
God, no, these are legitimate job offers.
Okay, cool.
I do get those, and I just honestly block them. Or, hey, do you want to join my multi-level marketing thing? I'm like, hell no. Like, I've got a job.
I
don't
love
need
it
to
when
do
you get
this.
one that's like, would you want to grow your business fast? Here's some entrepreneur tips. I'm like, do I own a business that I don't know of? I just had this happen the other day, except it was a phone call. I got a phone
Yeah.
call from a number, and I answered it, and then there was nothing. And then I said hello, and I waited a couple seconds, and it just goes, this is the Department of Treasury. Whatever your profile or something is being tracked because you did some type of thing with collections. Please stay on the line. And the number would hang up. So I'm sleeping, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. A dude calls me and goes, I'm tired of this fucking number calling me. I'm like, bro, it's a automated machine using my number and your number. I got the same call from this number. He goes, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, man. He goes, I'm sorry about that, buddy. I hope I didn't wake you. I was like, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. You did wake
Yeah, of
me.
course you did wake me up.
And then he goes, how are you doing? And wants to get into a conversation. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I can't right now. I just hung up.
You're like, I'm literally asleep. Like, go away. Yeah, so I do get spam, but honestly, I usually just ignore them. Or it's like, oh, I see you tagged a picture of a horse. Do you want to join our horse Instagram? I'm like, yes, I like horses.
You could
but
have
I
used
do
any
not want to
example.
be.
You tossed out horse.
Yeah, I was like, I do not want to be an ambassador for this pony club. Like,
I don't want to be a former jockey.
no, like I'm okay. Like I'm quite content. But yeah, no, I did a post a while ago about the Titanic because I got this really weird thing with shipwrecks. So
Well,
as I say, I
okay,
get,
hang on. That's one close to my heart. So what do you
yeah.
mean about the Titanic?
So my great granddad survived a shipwreck in New Zealand, and his wife died, and their child died in a shipwreck off the coast of New Zealand in the late 1800s. I think it was 1870s.
Do you know the
So
story?
I do know the story, but I'm not crash hot on it, but I do know most of the story.
Oh.
But so because of that, I've always had this really thing with shipwrecks. And so I have obviously my obsession with Titanic started because of the film, but I was also only 8 when that came out. But I went to the Titanic Museum in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and they do a video that you can kind of sit in like an IMAX theater of them going down and diving to the Titanic, and they've got all the underwater shots. It's really cool. It's like probably one of my favorite museums ever, although they need more collection items, but also that's unethical. So it was just so interesting. And so I kind of put up this post about my visit to the Belfast Titanic Museum, and then I kind of put up another post about shipwrecks, and then I get this message through my Instagram being like, hey, are you really into shipwrecks? And I was like, yeah, I know some things about stuff. And then it was like, oh, do you want to come and have a chat with me at this museum? I was like, this is not legitimate. I'm like, I don't know who this person is. And then I realized I'd met them before. I was like, okay, so they've reached out to me. And then I ended up getting a contract working for the New Zealand Maritime Museum for a couple of months, working on a book about boats. So like,
That's crazy because I had talked to previously. Her name's Jessica, the underwater or the just Jessica, the archaeologist on Instagram, I think. But she's like an underwater archaeologist. And I was
Oh
talking
yeah,
to her. I was like, I feel like a better way to get people to learn from something like, so, let's say the Titanic, to get people to better experience what that was like, besides seeing Leonardo DiCaprio's beautiful face on TV, is I think you should put them in a simulation where like the boat is sinking and you get to experience with no like imminent threat to your life or anything. Like you're not going to drown, but just feel what the water must have felt like being in that situation of being in the lower decks and then just having
yeah,
water start filling up the room. And you're like, oh my God, like I need to get out of here. And then trying to survive that, I was like, I feel like a lot more people would have a more respect for stuff like that. And abandoned shipwrecks are like stuff I was super interested for or into for a while. Ghost ships too, like people that would talk about
oh,
ghost
so,
ships.
oh, and then don't even start me on the Bermuda Triangle.
Ah,
Like,
that's a tough one too. Me and Jessica talked about that. It's like the electromagnetic frequency that goes on there too, and also apparently that it's something with the horizon line where when planes are flying they can't tell because the blue of the sky matches the blue of the sea, so you can't tell where the horizon line is, so it's like an optical illusion, and they
oh
don't know if they're
wow.
going up or down, so next thing you know they think they're going up and they're actually plummeting straight into the sea. It's like a whole thing, like when you're in space you don't know what direction up and down, there's none of that.
Oh my God. So yeah, so that's kind of something else that
Stay
so
away from cruises is all I'm saying.
oh yeah, no, I've never gone to cruise.
Imagine being with coronavirus happened, all the people that were stuck on cruises and they couldn't return back to port.
So my friend's dad works as a captain on like a cargo, what cargo ship, like a big container ship. And he works in I was like trying to think, I was like, what does he do? So he works on, so he's on a container ship captain, went to India and he was supposed to be there for 3 months and then ended up being stuck at sea for 9 months because India wouldn't let him dock because of coronavirus. And so they had to stay out in international waters and go around in circles for like 6 months until they finally allowed him to come on. And then he got to fly home. So for 6 months, he is at sea on a boat with all the crew
Mm.
going around in circles at international waters, basically just wasting petrol until India would let him on.
You literally have to ration your food at that point because you're only stocked up for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think. I mean, he's been a captain on cargo container ships for a very long time, but I think that trip he was like, you know what? I'm just going to retire. I'm done.
There was a famous case off like Sydney, Australia, about a crew that went missing. It was three guys that just went on like a fishing trip. One of the guys was slightly older than the rest, I think by like 20 something years. And he was like in his 60s, and the rest of them were like in their 40s. But like it was this weird thing. They did a last call in, like, hey, we're still out to sea, we're doing fine, everything. And then the radio got cut off, and then next thing you know, they just find this ship, everything, chessboard, like they were playing chess in the middle of the, like it's a little sailboat, they're playing chess inside the sailboat, all the pieces were still up straight, so there was no sign of a struggle. There was a gun placed on the table, so what they were thinking was they either got captured by pirates, like Somalian pirates, or one of those types of, like, I guess maybe somebody doing drugs or selling drugs or something, doing
Yeah,
using boats or something, and then they saw it, so the guys captured them. Or they fell off the ship, but there was no sign of a struggle. There was nothing, and there was just a gun on the table next to a chessboard. But it wasn't a tidal wave that could have done it. But they just lost this crew, and it's been a case for like 10 years now. Nobody knows what the hell happened to them. Like, that's why you should never go on a ship if you don't have any captain experience. Just don't. Like, it
yeah,
doesn't make any sense. I just commit to never seeing you again.
yeah. I just no, it doesn't. So as much as I love shipwrecks, I would not go and visit one because I like other people doing it. So yeah, you can go and I'll watch the video and I'll pretend I'm there, but I'm not gonna go.
Are you scared of sharks?
I actually love sharks,
Of course you
but
do.
I'm not scared of sharks, but I think because I'm not also that good of a swimmer. So I think for me,
Okay.
I would be the one that would go diving and just never make it back up. And then probably also my other side is I'm so curious that I'll just keep going and keep going and keep going and then be like, oh crap, I've run out of oxygen. Like,
My biggest fear, I think, is getting the bends. I've watched a
Yeah.
whole documentary on someone that was suffering from the bends, and I was like, that's got to be so hard that your body does not understand the pressure in itself right now, that you literally have to decompress in a chamber for a couple of hours. Like, it looks
Yeah.
so freaking painful that you just
Oh,
can't
it looks
stop.
awful.
I look at that, I'm like, I mean, it's cool, I guess, if you're going to be an underwater archaeologist and stuff, to be able to explore like planes and stuff. But then I get scared, like, imagine if this is somebody's resting place. Like, I don't want to turn around a corner and the next thing you know, there's like a skeleton. Like,
Well, that's the problem with the Titanic now, isn't it? Because they're saying that they want to go down and fetch the radio, and it's been ongoing for years and years because the salvage company has, I think, got rights to go down and get it. But then everybody else, like I think even it's the museums, there's like 5 museums in the UK, and then also another museum or institution in the US are saying you can't go down there and fetch the radio because you have to open up part of the Titanic to get to the black box. And it is a human grave. Like, why would you want to go and disturb, like, it's a site for, it's the same as like if people wanted to go into Pearl Harbor and then start going through the Arizona.
but they do
So
do that.
why do they? And
I
there's still bodies in it. It's a
I've
mass
been
grave.
I've been to the Pearl Harbor Museum in Hawaii, and the weird thing is, what they do is, I guess they get away because they say it like this: is that when I went there, there was a veteran who was still alive, and they told
Yeah.
him that once he dies, they can get his ashes in his urn and place it inside of where his comrades were buried. So they're able to do that, and they've done that multiple times, and nobody has brought up a thing about that. I think that's because it seems like you're not really disturbing it; you're like adding a piece to it or something. I don't know how they
But
get
are they
away with it.
going into the Arizona to take
They
things
open it
out?
up, yeah, and they're not taking anything out. They're actually putting
Yeah.
things in.
Things in. I think that's different though. And I think with the
That's
Titanic
still
is that they want to go in
disturbing
and
the
take things
thing.
out. It's still disturbing, but I think that people's death wishes are there's kind of a little bit more of a gray area around it. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that personally, but I think it's more of a gray area. But I think with the Titanic is that, like, they go and they do all the salvaging around the outside of it, and they're picking up bits and pieces and they're putting them into the museum. And there was like part of the side of the hull that they brought up to the surface. And then I think just getting to the black box, it's just like, yes, it would be cool to have all that audio if it survived for the record, but
Not at the
can we
expense
just
of
not,
somebody's family.
yeah, and not the expense of like disturbing a mass grave. Like, there's even people's like personal belongings still sitting down there. That there's a guy who has his hat still sitting on the bed where he probably was when he died. And the whole thing, to me, it just does not sit well. And understand that the people with the salvaging rights, it's kind of like the same as like, hey, we're going to Egypt, we just found a mummy, let's unwrap it.
I
Yes,
bet you
it's
$20.
interesting.
I bet you
Yeah.
$20 they're just gonna.
US or New Zealand dollars? US,
Let's
because it's
let's
for my current.
let's okay. Let's do US then. But I think that they're gonna end up probably getting a petition or getting a contract written up that's gonna be in a really good word saying like, well, if any family has a problem with us going down there, then we'll be able to
Yeah,
pull out some of your family's whatever heirlooms and give them to you, so then you benefit from
yeah,
it as well.
yeah. That's the way that they'll go about it.
See,
Um,
that interests me, the Titanic, and then also pirates. I would like I've
yeah.
been on a Pirates of the Caribbean kick for like the past week now. I've seen all the movies over and over and over again. I don't like that. I love that whole sea thing. I love how mermaids were thought of. I love all this types of stuff that goes on. I really hope there's a Kraken. I'd rather take that over a Meg or one of those megalodon things.
Well, did you know that this is another one of my fun facts. You know all the old at sea maps that were drawn by the old sailors, and they've got these little like squirmy things, and they're like, oh, those are the underwater monsters.
Yeah.
They're actually whale penises.
No fucking way.
No, they are, because massive
Don't do this.
whales.
Don't lie to me.
I'm not lying. So whales, when they're like playing, flip upside down, and they have their penises flailing on the surface. So all these times that they thought they were tentacles is actually whale penises.
Oh my God, who was the guy that fucked that up? Oh,
And who was the person that discovered it was a whale?
God, oh, that's a whale penis for sure. I've seen a couple of them.
So that's kind
That's
of,
crazy.
yeah, so all those old maps, because my friend is obsessed with old maps. He's like, look at this old map. And I'm like, that's a whale penis. He's like, it's not. And I'm like, do you want to bet? Anyways, I won that one. So um yeah, there's all these different little things that, I mean, yeah, I don't know if there is a kraken. Don't yeah, the sea's fascinating.
I definitely think there was a giant squid. I don't think there was something like the size of a kraken that was a legit
No,
thing.
so there's a colossal squid. So there's
Yeah.
a one that's bigger than a giant squid. And they're creepy. Like they have an actual beak.
Yeah.
I mean, watching the squid was an interesting day, and one I'll never forget. And then the interesting thing about so I worked with a marine biologist for a while. I'm not trained as a marine biologist at all. Like my background is definitely more like ethnographic materials. So it just so happened to be like my university job. So we kind of, I did all sorts of random jobs with her. So with the squid was a really good example. There was another time that they had somehow acquired half of a shark, like a great white shark. But because it's so heavy and so big, for some reason they only got the top half. So so all of these things are preserved in giant things of ethanol. And you have to go through and test all the ethanol levels to make sure that it can be preserved for long term. And then the lid on it is like this giant metal case because you need to make sure that it's not going to evaporate. So we had to change this shark head from one tank to another. And she was like, do you mind helping me lift it? And I kind of looked at her and I was like, how do I lift a shark head? And I was like, there's nothing to hold on to. And you have to have gloves on so you're not touching it because it's obviously covered in ethanol. And it's like slimy. And I was like,
Don't
the only
drop
way
it.
I know, and I was like, do not drop this goddamn shark. So like the only way I could kind of like move it was to put my hand it kind of around its mouth. And I had 3 layers of gloves on. So I was kind of holding it in a weird way. And I looked down and all of these teeth marks had gone through all the layers of my gloves and I had little dots all the top of my hand. And it was so heavy. There was about 6 of us trying to lift it and we were struggling. I
Look,
was like, God, how does the sea float at the sea?
I thought people at the morgue had the weirdest freaking job, but you have the weirdest job.
I do have a very strange job.
If
Some
you
days I have a very strange job.
if you had to pick, I know you're a fascination with the sea, but if you had to pick anything from either the sea, maybe Egypt, maybe anything of that, what would you choose?
To kind of study or to work on.
Because I really love the sea. I really think
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing. I would love to be able to see a lot of the stuff from the sea, but I feel like I would be way more fascinated with like opening up a tomb and then seeing a lot of like the statues, a lot of the prizes, and a lot of the stuff they believe. Like even seeing like a coffin with a mummy wrapped up inside of it. I would love to be able to experience that because I feel like that is the crazy like because that links to a whole nother thing. Like the sea is a bottomless mystery, secrets of history that just lie underneath the surface. But then when you're looking at some religion or culture that thought that preserving the body was their ticket, it was like their passage to the afterlife, like putting gold coins on them and giving them all these treasures so they can take it to the afterlife. They seem the closest to what everyone is kind of trying to want to know the answer to, which is there an afterlife? And I feel like that's going to give us the most information for it.
Well, then I'll throw it back to you. So the conspiracy theories about the pyramids. So them saying, I do love reading a good conspiracy theory. Don't know if I ever believe them, but I
I
like
don't
to
know if it
well round.
I don't know if it was aliens, but I definitely think that like I don't know.
There was a pre-culture to Egyptians. There
Yeah,
definitely was. And so the book that I just finished reading, and everyone's going to absolutely blast me if I ever say his name because they're like, that's not right, aliens. But basically, this guy had gone through and done all this testing on the Sphinx and thinks that he found water damage
you mean
on the
Graham
Sphinx.
Hancock?
Yes, I was trying not to say his name because I know everyone's going to be like, don't read his books. I'm like, but I'm interesting. I like to know all sides of everything.
He was just on a podcast recently with another guy where they found out that a lot of the religious stories that talk about like the Holy Grail and these drinking cups and all these things, they actually instead of just wine that was in the cup, there was a lot of drugs, heavily infused psychedelics, which
No.
leads into it leads into my Bigfoot theory. People are like, Bigfoot's not real. I'm like, first of all, I'm not a Bigfoot believer. That'd be cool if he was, but I'm saying maybe it's psychedelics. That's the whole thing.
Yeah,
When we talk about the burning bush with Moses, when we talk about all these things, it's known as the cicacia bush, which is basically like a drug. It's a psychedelic plant.
yeah,
Peyote, all these things have been influenced in our culture. You had people in North America give the same exact descriptions of a Bigfoot as the same people in the Tibetan mountains. So that
yeah,
you wonder how they came that close together without cell phone or email or internet. So I'm thinking it's psychedelics. Maybe that's like a spirit, or maybe that's some type of thing that everybody talks about seeing their spiritual guide was in the form of an owl. Whatever it correlates to you, there was this thing that was interdimensional that could talk to you. I'm like, people, if you listen to any stories on psychedelics, people talk about interdimensional shit all the time because literally you can do it to yourself if you've ever seen or been high before. It's about
yeah,
trying to realize that I'm in a fucking room right now with
yeah.
four walls.
But
These
there's all this
walls,
other stuff going on.
but these walls are just cells. And that can honestly, if you tear it down, if somebody came in here like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen, wanted to rip apart my room down to every last atom, they would just be atoms. So why is it so fucking hard to believe that a drug could shatter those illusions for you and you
Yeah.
perceive a different thing? Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, Graham
Oh
Hancock's
no, I was
awesome.
just saying that I think that his stuff's quite interesting, although, it's not, it's different because everybody's like, it's a conspiracy theorist, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but everything that you're taught at school, like, should you not be questioning history? I'm not saying it's necessarily right or necessarily wrong,
I like to
but we're
entertain
taught,
the idea.
yeah, I like to know things. So, I thought it was quite interesting in the last book that I read from him that it was talking about that there was all this water damage on the Sphinx. And they think that the Sphinx was actually built between like 10,000 and 12,000 BC, whereas it's attributed to like, oh my God, I'm going to get this wrong, which is going to be so embarrassing because I actually studied to be an Egyptologist. Is it the third dynasty? Sixth dynasty? So, anyways, the whole thing was about they have dated it to be thousands of years later and attributed it to a pharaoh thousands of years later. But then they all write in the history books that the Sphinx is linked to the pyramids and that was all a lot later. And it's kind of like, is it because we're just attributing things left, right, and center? But then where's the like scientific evidence for this dating? So, anyways, I find all of that quite interesting.
I don't know if it was off the coast of New Zealand or somewhere. It was somewhere in like near, I guess, Africa, maybe. I don't know. It's somewhere out a little bit farther away from North America. I could just give you that much information. But
Yeah.
they have
So it's not in North America.
well, they found they found pyramids underwater, and I said, well, if they found water erosion on the Sphinx, that means there must have been water there. So how easy would it have been to be able to build these things if it was underwater when things can weigh a hell of a lot less? So I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe that, but then they're like, well, what about breathing apparatuses? How would they be able to hold them? I'm like, lots of them
Aliens.
died. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's so mixed matchy on both sides of it. But then like it leads into my favorite thing, which is the sunken city of Atlantis. I would love to know
Yeah.
that was real, but people are like, it's a bunch of mermaids that built a city. I'm like, no, 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 no. What they're thinking it was is that it was off of a piece of a land that got chipped from the plate shifting, and slowly
Yeah.
each year just kept sinking and sinking farther and farther into the water. So then you have this
Yeah.
ancient civilization that's underwater. Maybe nobody's living in it, but it's an aspect of it's just this underwater city, it looks like.
Exactly. And I think that there is a lot more to the world that, we learn, and there's so much more. And then you were saying before, like all these explorers and things have been done. I'm like, I don't think so. I think within our lifetime, we're going to find out all these different things and we're going to unlearn a lot of things as well. Because I know at school, like especially so obviously I'm New Zealand and we've got like Maori culture. Through high school, I learned nothing about, well, I learned a little bit about Maori culture, but really nothing about our own history. And everything that we did in history class was to do with European history. I don't even know American history. And the only reason why I know is because I teach myself things. And so I think that there's going to be this massive unlearning from moving away from that sort of colonial perspective. And now there's this massive push, and it's only, oh my God, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's only been in the last couple of years that we need to be teaching our own Māori history in
Yeah,
schools
I
because people need to know.
I've talked about this a lot recently, which is the fact of like I think the issue that everyone's having with history is that we weren't told the right version of it. We were told the
Yeah.
more glorified version of it. Like, you see all the good sides of celebrities, and then TMZ shows you the bad side, and that's when you start to hate those celebrities that you thought were perfect and flawless. I'm like, if they just would have told you straight up off the bat all the original blatant crap that goes on. And it's interesting because it goes into like everything that happens, like JFK, Abraham Lincoln. I mean, there's even the talk of Abraham Lincoln. The reason, like, they thought he was he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, but they think it was a deeper thing with the oil companies, because I think
Yeah.
it was like 3 weeks before he was killed, he went to the oil companies asking for a bailout during the war to be able to help. Have you ever seen Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter? I know that's a bad movie to reference when we're talking about like a theory on something, but
Go for it.
where he was using silver and stuff from people's houses, and they were shooting cannons and stuff using that as bullets. Well, he went to the oil companies asking for a bailout because he needed help during war times. The company said, sure, we'll give you a bailout, we'll give you all the money you need, but we want you to do this. And he said, I'm not doing that, because he was going to take a bribe basically, and he was like, I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. So he's like, I'm going to print my own money, and that's why
Yeah.
our money here is green. That's why they call them greenbacks, is because of that. Then 3 weeks later, or like a month later or something, he gets shot in the head by an actor. That seems a little bit like sketchy government stuff right there. Like, hold on a second, what? And then a week later, his John Wilkes Booth's brother saved his son from getting hit by a car. And you're thinking, well, that's just a coincidence. There weren't that many cars back in the day, and they only went like 5 miles an hour. So you literally have to be trying to hit somebody. That's what the term jaywalker comes from. Is jaywalker is
Ah.
actually an offensive slur. It means like you're a fucking idiot, because if you were to get hit by a car back then, you were literally an idiot. Like they're moving so slow, you could walk faster than one of them.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that about jaywalkers, but I also know that it's not illegal to jaywalk in New Zealand.
It's illegal to
But
jaywalk everywhere over here.
yeah, we can do whatever we want.
If you even
No,
slip
just
off,
joking.
if you even slip off the curb, you're getting arrested.
Really?
Not that bad, but
Oh,
you get tickets for a lot of stuff.
so no, we kind of just cross the road wherever we want, I guess. And then I just would always find it really strange that I was with Americans. So I was telling you about how my friends are in Boston, and that's why I was trying to work out where you were. And I still don't know if it's the same time zone, but I think you are, because I have everybody tracked on my phone of where they live. I'm like, okay, what's the time there? What's the time there? I
Are
can
you
ring them. It's
stalking
fine.
these people?
Yeah, it's fine. They also stalk me. So they would be stopped and they're like, yeah, we got to wait to walk. And I'm like, I'm a Kiwi. I just walked straight out there. And they're like, it's illegal. I'm like, what? Like, who is this? Why do you live with all these rules? And I'm like, actually, we're the weird ones.
I think it's the factor of, because a lot of times, like, I'll be driving and then it won't be a go for people to walk, and then you'll just see a dude that just starts walking really slowly. He's like, hit me, I dare you to hit me, like that attitude. And that's why jaywalking is like pretty strict down here, is because it's like you're just really causing traffic jams.
Yeah, no, it's very, yeah, I really like living in New Zealand, but as I said, we are basically in an island floating in the middle of the ocean.
The only connection I have to it is I had a little tiki that was gifted through my family that says New Zealand on the back. It just says made in New Zealand. They could have bought it from a thrift store. I have no clue. But it's a little tiki, and I had it when I was a little kid. I always had it on my computer, and I remember
Oh,
New Zealand because of that.
so it's called a heitiki.
I hate tiki.
Yeah.
Was
So
that?
there's also, that's the name of them, like a heitiki. So the
Oh,
tiki are Hawaiian.
oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
You're
So
shattering the illusions of my mind.
sorry, I'm
I
from New Zealand. I know stuff.
need to go and
Sometimes it's
visit
not
there.
useful.
It sounds
Yeah.
like fun, but people always complain about something about it. I have no clue.
Oh, probably. But do you know what? We actually have the best coffee in the world.
Everybody says that.
Australia and New Zealand have the best coffee. And I moved to London and I was like, oh, I just want a coffee. Like our daily habits are revolved around coffee in this country. So I get to work and I'm like, oh yeah, just at work. And then honestly, everyone on my team was like, do you need a coffee? And we're like, yeah. So we all go for like a little wander, get a coffee and come back. And then even my parents are both retired, 10 a.m. every single morning. they will drive out and go get a coffee. Like everyone is revolved around coffee. And then I moved to London. I was like, yeah, I've got this like habit. I've got morning tea time at work. I'll go grab a coffee, and you take a sip and you're like, what the actual crap is this?
I
Like,
had
this
that
is not
happen.
coffee.
I used to work with Romanians, and they would drink the coffee and then they'd spit it out and they this coffee shit. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, Romania is known for the best coffee. I'm like, everybody's known for the best coffee. I talked to a coffee grower in Colombia named Jose Ace Vito, and he would tell you straight up that
Oh yeah,
best coffee.
everybody apart from the US and the UK are better at coffee. I'm sorry.
Look, as long as it's warm, I'll take it. I like a hot chocolate. I hate tea though. I can't do tea.
Yeah, so we don't. I mean,
Like
people
people that
New
drink
Zealand's,
chamomile before bed or something, you're a psychopath. Don't do that.
yeah, I was about to say they're a psychopath, but so because New Zealand was colonized, you know, quite late in the game compared to other countries in the world, we have a lot of like British influence. So there's a lot of tea drinkers, which I'm like,
Generation of
okay,
Zodiac killers. I'm telling you.
I'm like, okay, you do you, but no, they do like black tea with milk,
Oh my God.
hot black tea with milk.
Have you ever had like unsweetened tea? It's disgusting.
We don't even have sweetened tea.
Put a sugar packet in it.
Oh, that's what you mean by that. Yeah, no. So I'm a coffee girl, but like, you know, New Zealand is so diverse. Like we're kind of a melting pot of culture. Like where I used to live in Auckland, there's like 145 different cultural groups, and people don't realize how diverse, you know, it is and how many different languages are being spoken. And then I think, you know, there's this massive melting pot. And as I said, like our colonial age is actually, or our colonized age is really late in the game. So, you know, early, you know, missionaries really only came to New Zealand in like the early 1800s, which on the grand scheme of things is quite late.
That's definitely late to the game.
Yeah. So so it says that, you know, New Zealand was like the Maldives. I don't know why I did that because that's not true. Maldives came to New Zealand from Hawaii in about, you know, 1200 AD. 1200? No. Yeah,
Look,
1200.
time zones screw me up, and now you're tossing out dates.
Yeah, so like 1200 AD. So what, like 800 years ago? So New Zealand is really young. So like, you know, 1200 AD, there's all this other stuff going on in the world, and we're still kind of, that's the mythological date of our founding by Maori coming from Hawaii, which is apparently near Hawaii.
Well, let's say with the same thing with the Declaration of Independence, people always talk about like how old it is. I'm like, it's not that long ago. If you think of the grand scheme of things, it's a couple hundred years ago, which we're working off a paper that was written by candlelight with oil. So I'm just saying we can update that to our IMAX for a little bit, maybe change a couple of things.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, on the grand scheme of things, we're a very young country, and like my family is also, or my mum's an immigrant. So, and then like my dad is only like fourth generation Kiwi. And it's not often that now you don't have very many people who actually kind of have, they're like, oh, I'm like, apart from if you're like tangata whenua, which means like you're the people of the land, so you're Māori, then you can kind of whakapapa, which just mean you can take your generations back to like the early kind of the first boats, they call them waka, that came to New Zealand. So yeah, it's not a lot of people that have kind of like multi-generations in New Zealand. So yeah, that's kind of,
this has been a giant sponsorship for Ancestry.com.
Actually very good at Ancestry. No, so yeah, I don't know, just everybody should just come to New Zealand and come to my small country town museum and look at my exhibition because it's really cool. And I'm about to do a video. I'm still editing it. That's why I'm at home today, because I needed to do it without distraction. I'm doing a digital walkthrough of the exhibition I just put up that I took 6 weeks to do. So,
well, where can people find it? We can just end it on that. You know, people can find your Instagram page and see your videos.
So yeah, my Instagram page is Museums with Meg, and I will be doing an IGTV, which should be uploading today if I can figure out how. But yeah, so I know with lockdown, there was a lot of kind of viral trends that were going on. But one that was created in New Zealand was called Formal Friday. So I don't know what it's like in the US, but on Fridays, it's like casual Friday at work, at the office.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
normal.
so that's normal. So we did the opposite. So obviously during lockdown, everyone's at home working in activewear, working in track pants. And so one of our TV presenters was like, look, I'm really kind of over living in, my comfy gears. I'm going to do the opposite of casual Friday. I'm going to do formal Friday. So she turned up to present the news in like a ball dress and a tiara, and it went viral. So then all these other people every other week would be hopping on social media being like, this is my formal Friday, and then tagging her in. And the last time I checked on Instagram, she'd got to about 40,000 hashtags. And I thought, that is such a cool idea. And I was like, why was this created? And this is to kind of like be quite whimsical, to kind of break up that social anxiety of, lockdown and COVID-19. And we had varying levels all the time.
That's why that video of
And
the guy drinking the cranberry juice is so popular, is because it seems
yeah,
like it's peace in a time of disruption.
exactly. And it's like this chaotic, kind of uncertain and unprecedented timing. So I had just started at the museum, and they turned up and they were like, yeah, so our latest touring exhibition's cancelled. What are you going to do? And I was like, sorry, what? I don't even know like the collection. They're like, make something. So I was like, okay, what do I know? Fashion. And we've got quite a few boxes of garments. So I went through every single box, decided what should go on display, just sat down, and I was like, every single thing I want to put on display is formal wear. How does this fit in? And I was like, I'm going to do a response to Formal Friday. And I've got pieces in there from about the 1830s until today, and kind of showing off what different formal wear has meant to different people through different periods of time. So it's just a very fun exhibition that, yeah, as I said, I came up within 6 weeks, and it's showing that kind of contrast as well between early colonial fashion in New Zealand, and then also how that kind of fitted into like the more traditional Māori wear as well. So we have beautiful handmade woven
Don't
cloaks.
explain it all to them. You got to let them find out what it is too.
Oh, it's on the video. So
Yeah, well,
so
you
it's
didn't even
actually,
about to say you didn't even promote the Instagram page. You're telling them all about it. I'm like, well, tell them the name of the page.
yeah. Oh yeah. So my Instagram page is Museums with Meg, and I will be putting up my IGTV, and I talk all about it anyway, and just how, yeah, just fashion. It's just fun. And as I said, it's a very small museum. Like the room that I worked with was about 40 square meters, and somehow I managed to make it work. So yeah,
You got to do
that's
the
kind of
best with what you got.
exactly, and with no budget. So
We need to fund more money into museums for sure.
yeah, exactly. And the small museums